The life you build can be shattered in a single moment. For one woman, that moment came on a rain-slicked Tuesday night, pregnant and full of hope, hiding behind a marble column at a glittering charity gala. She was there to surprise her loving husband, the man she had given up everything for. But the surprise was hers. She heard her name, the simple fake name she used, spoken from his lips with a cruel, dismissive laugh. She listened as he described her to another woman, as a temporary comfort, a stepping stone. And then she watched as he kissed that other woman, sealing a betrayal that would not only break her heart, but ignite a fire that would see her return from the ashes, not as a victim, but as an empire. Ginevra Blythe ceased to exist the day she moved to the suburbs of Seattle. In her place was Jenna Smith, a woman with a fabricated past as a small-town librarian from Oregon, a quiet soul with a love for classic novels and Earl Grey tea. She'd meticulously crafted the persona, shedding the weight of her real name like a heavy winter coat. The name Blythe was synonymous with global logistics private equity and a level of wealth that was more myth than reality for most people. It was a name that opened any door, but closed off the one thing Ginevra desperately wanted to be loved for herself, not for the 9 zeros that followed her family's net worth in the Financial Times. She met Lorcan Ashford at a small independent coffee shop. He was sketching in a moleskin notebook, his brow furrowed in concentration, his hand moving with a fluid grace that captivated her. He was an architect, he told her, a junior associate at a respectable but unremarkable firm, Davenport and Associates. He had dreams that soared higher than the skyscrapers he designed on paper. He spoke of clean lines, sustainable materials, and creating spaces that made people feel something. Ginevra, who had grown up in sterile mansions that felt more like museums than homes, was enchanted. To him, she was just Jenna, a kind, intelligent woman who worked part-time at the local library and seemed to understand the quiet aspirations of his heart. She never questioned his long hours. She'd pack him lunch, listen to his frustrations about his creatively stifling boss, Mr. Davenport, and offer gentle, insightful suggestions on his designs. She had a keen eye for structure and flow, a remnant of a world-class education she never spoke of. Their love story felt like a screenplay. Picnics in Gasworks Park, ferry rides to Bainbridge Island, and quiet nights spent curled up in their modest rented house on Willow Creek Lane. It was the most authentic thing Ginevra had ever experienced. Within a year, they were married in a simple courthouse ceremony. Her only guests were 2 witnesses pulled from the waiting area. She sent a single terse email to her father's private account. "I'm married. I'm happy. Please respect my privacy." The reply was a single, cold word: foolish. Lorcan was ambitious, a trait Ginevra admired. His primary focus was the firm's annual design competition, the winner of which would become the lead on the prestigious Sky Spire project, a tower that would redefine the city's skyline. For months, the floor of their small study was littered with blueprints and foam models. Lorcan was brilliant, but he was stuck. His designs were competent, but safe. One evening, seeing his despair, Jenna sat with him. What if the support structures weren't just internal? She mused, tracing a finger over his blueprint. What if they were part of the aesthetic? An external branching framework, like a tree reaching for the sun. It would be organic, strong, and completely unique. A light went on in Lorcan's eyes. He grabbed a pencil and began sketching furiously, her words guiding his hand. The design that emerged was revolutionary. It was her concept born from a memory of a unique building she'd seen in Singapore with her father, filtered through her own innate intelligence. But she let him believe it was a collaborative spark, his gene wars ignited by her support. She was his muse, his quiet partner, and that was all she wanted to be. "Jenna, this is it," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he held the final rendering. "This is the one. We did it." The word "we" was the sweetest sound she had ever heard. A few weeks later, she found herself staring at 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test, her heart swelling with a joy so fierce it brought tears to her eyes. She was going to be a mother. She and Lorcan were going to have a family, a real family built on love and shared dreams, a universe away from the cold, contractual world of the Blythes. She decided to surprise him. He had just won the Sky Spire competition. His career was about to launch into the stratosphere. His firm was hosting a major charity gala at the Seattle Art Museum to celebrate an event he'd insisted was too stuffy and corporate for his down-to-earth Jenna. But she wanted to see the look on his face when he was honored. More than that, she wanted to tell him about the baby in a moment of pure triumph. Dressed in a simple but elegant navy dress she'd bought at a local boutique, she slipped into the gala. The room was a sea of designer gowns and bespoke suits. She felt a pang of self-consciousness, a ghost of her old life brushing against the new. She spotted Lorcan across the room, looking impossibly handsome in his tuxedo. But he wasn't alone. He was laughing with a striking woman in a shimmering, backless silver dress. It was Penelope Davenport, her husband's boss's daughter. Ginevra smiled, ready to go over and join them, but she paused behind a large marble column, wanting to savor the moment. And that's when she heard it. "That design is breathtaking, Lorcan," Penelope said, her voice like honey laced with venom. "Father is ecstatic. You're going to be made a junior partner." "It's just the beginning," Lorcan replied, his voice smooth and confident, a tone she'd never heard him use before. It was the voice of a performer. "And to think you were stuck with that bland, boxy concept just a few months ago." "What changed?" Penelope asked, running a perfectly manicured finger down his lapel. Lorcan chuckled. It was a low, cruel sound. "Let's just say I had some temporary inspiration. My little librarian, Jenna. She's sweet, but dreadfully simple. She had this one bizarrely coherent idea. A broken clock is right twice a day, I suppose. It was a stepping stone, darling. You and your father, this partnership. This is the destination." The world tilted on its axis. Temporary inspiration, dreadfully simple. A stepping stone. Each word was a physical blow. Her mind reeled, trying to make sense of the man she loved saying these things. "What about her?" Penelope pressed a hint of jealousy in her voice. "Don't worry about Jenna," Lorcan said, his voice dropping. He leaned in and kissed Penelope, a long, passionate kiss that was a world away from the gentle affection he showed her. "Once the partnership is finalized and the project is fully underway, she'll get a decent settlement and be a distant memory. She served her purpose." The air left Ginevra's lungs. The joy, the hope, the baby, it all felt like it was dissolving into ash inside her. The man she had given up an empire for had just sold her out for a junior partnership. The love she thought was real was a transaction. And she, Jenna Smith, was the commodity that had just been spent. For a long moment, Ginevra couldn't move. Her feet were rooted to the polished marble floor, her hand instinctively clutching her stomach, a protective gesture for the tiny life that was now caught in the wreckage of this lie. The ambient noise of the gala, the clinking of champagne flutes, the murmur of polite conversation, the distant swell of a string quartet faded into a dull, roaring tsunami in her ears. She watched them, Lorcan and Penelope, as they moved toward the terrace, his hand possessively on the small of her back. The man she had loved, the man whose child she was carrying, was a stranger. The life they had built in the little house on Willow Creek Lane was not a sanctuary. It was a stage, and she had been the unwitting lead in a play about his ambition. A cold, clarifying rage began to cut through the shock. It was a familiar feeling, an emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. It was the blithe ice, the chilling resolve that had built a global empire from nothing. Her father had always told her sentiment was a liability. For the first time, she understood he was right. She turned and walked, not ran, out of the museum. Each step was deliberate, measured. She didn't stumble. She didn't cry. Not yet. The tears were a luxury she couldn't afford. As she stepped out into the damp Seattle night, the drizzle felt like a mockery of the storm raging inside her. She didn't hail a cab. She walked. The 3 miles back to their house felt like a pilgrimage through the ruins of her life. When she opened the front door, the scent of the beef stew she had left simmering for him in the slow cooker filled the air. It was a homey, comforting smell that now seemed grotesque, a prop from a life that was no longer hers. Methodically, she walked through the small house. She saw the worn copy of Wuthering Heights on her nightstand, the half-finished crossword on the kitchen table, the framed photo of their courthouse wedding on the mantelpiece, a smiling, hopeful fool named Jenna, standing next to a calculating liar. She went to their study. Spread across the large drafting table were the Sky Spire blueprints. His name was in the title block, Lorcan Ashford, lead architect. Her idea, her concept, her contribution erased and absorbed into his success. Using a red marker, she drew a single sharp line through his name. It was a small, petty act, but it felt like drawing first blood. An hour later, Lorcan came home. He was humming, his cheeks flushed with champagne and victory. He tossed his keys into the ceramic bowl by the door, the same bowl she had made in a pottery class. "Jenna, you're still up," he called out, loosening his tie. He walked into the living room and froze, finally sensing the glacial atmosphere. She was sitting in the armchair, her hands folded in her lap. The room was dark, except for a single lamp that cast long, ominous shadows. "How was the gala?" she asked, her voice eerily calm. "It was fine, a bit stuffy. You would have been bored." He lied effortlessly. "Good news, though. I think your design, our design, really sealed the deal. Davenport was incredibly impressed." The use of the word "our" now felt like an insult. I went to the gala Lorcan. The colour drained from his face. The charming, victorious facade crumbled, revealing the panicked, cornered man beneath. "You. What?" "Why, I told you it was a work thing. I wanted to surprise you," she said, her voice still quiet, but now with a sharp, brittle edge. "I had news, but I got a surprise of my own. I saw you with Penelope Davenport. I heard you." He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked around as if searching for an escape route. "Jenna, listen, you don't understand. That's just how this world works. It's networking. You have to play the game." "The game." She finally stood up, the icy control in her voice beginning to crack. "Was I part of the game? Lorcan, was our marriage just networking? Was our life a strategic move to get you a partnership? Of course not." He blustered, his voice rising. "I love you. Penelope means nothing. She's just a means to an end. For us, everything I am doing is for us, for our future." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. "Your future, you mean?" She shot back. "The one where you give me a decent settlement, and I become a distant memory. The one built on the foundation of my idea that you passed off as your own." He stared at her, utterly defeated. The jig was up. His expression shifted from panicked denial to something colder, uglier. resentment. "So you heard that," he said flatly. "Fine. Yes. Maybe I embellished. Maybe I used your little idea. So what, you're a librarian? What were you ever going to do with it? I'm the one who can make it a reality. I'm the one who put in the work, the hours, the years of training. You had one lucky thought. Don't act like you built the thing yourself." The cruelty of his words finally broke her. A single tear traced a hot path down her cheek. "I loved you, Lorcan. I gave up everything for you." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Gave up everything? What did you have to give up? Your part-time job shelving books? Your tiny apartment? I gave you a life, Jenna." The irony was so profound it was almost funny. She, Ginevra Blythe, who could buy this entire city block without checking her bank balance, was being told that this man in this rented house had given her a life. "I have one more piece of news for you, Lorcan," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of grief and fury. "The surprise I came to give you tonight. I'm pregnant." His face went from anger to stark, white horror. This was a complication he hadn't factored into his neat little plan. A child. A permanent tie to the stepping stone he was planning to discard. "No," he whispered. "You can't be." "I am," she said the words, tasting like poison. He looked at her, then at her belly, and his eyes were not filled with wonder or love, but with cold, hard calculation. She could see the gears turning in his head. A baby would complicate the divorce. It could be used for leverage. "Get out," she said, her voice a low command. "What? This is my house, too. Jenna, is it who pays the rent, Lorcan? Whose account is it wired from every month?" It was a detail she'd handled, a small allowance funneled from a trust she maintained, disguised as savings from her old life. He had never questioned it. "That doesn't matter," he stammered, wrong-footed. "It matters," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Nothing about this life was real, least of all you. Get out of my house." He stared at her, seeing for the first time not the gentle, agreeable Jenna, but a woman of unbreakable will. He saw the flicker of the blithe ice in her eyes, though he had no idea what it was. He grabbed his jacket and his car keys, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. "Fine," he snarled from the doorway. "Fine. Don't come crying to me when you realize you can't make it without me. You and your baby." He slammed the door, and the sound echoed through the house, the final violent punctuation mark on their sham of a marriage. Ginevra sank to the floor, the strength leaving her legs. The dam broke. Sobs racked her body, great gut-wrenching waves of pain for the man she thought she knew, for the future she thought they had, for the child who would now be born into a war instead of a home. Jenna Smith died on that floor. And in the darkness, surrounded by the ruins of a life built on lies, Ginevra Blythe began to claw her way back. The first phone call was the hardest she had ever had to make. She sat in the dark for hours, the silence of the house pressing in on her until the first grey light of dawn broke through the windows. She found her old satellite phone, a relic from her past life, hidden in the back of her closet, inside a hollowed-out copy of War and Peace. It was an encrypted device, untraceable, a direct line to one man. She dialed the number from memory. It rang twice before a familiar, gravelly voice answered with a single word. "Yes, Whitaker," she said, her own voice hoarse from crying. "It's me." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end. Mr. Whitaker had been her father's head of security and her personal protector for over 20 years. He was a man of unflinching loyalty and quiet competence. "Ginevra." He breathed the name, sounding foreign after so long. "Are you all right? Where are you? I'm in Seattle. I need to come home." The word home felt like ash in her mouth. "And Whitaker, I need you to erase someone. Erase Lorcan Ashford and Jenna Smith. I want every digital trace of our marriage, every public record, every photograph scrubbed from existence. I want it to be as if Jenna Smith never existed. Can you do that?" "Consider it done," he said without hesitation. "I'll have a jet on the ground at Boeing Field in 3 hours. A car will be at your location in 60 minutes. "Thank you," she whispered, and ended the call. Packing was a swift, brutal affair. She took nothing that reminded her of Lorcan. No pictures, no gifts, no books they had read together. She packed only her clothes, her personal documents, and the ultrasound picture from her first secret doctor's appointment, the tiny, grainy image of a life she would protect with everything she had. Before she left, she took the blueprints for the Sky Spire from the study. They were hers, after all. The journey back to New York was a blur. She flew on a Blythe Global Gulfstream G650, a level of luxury that felt alien and suffocating. When she landed, it was not Whitaker who met her on the tarmac, but her father. Alexander Blythe stood beside a black Maybach, an imposing figure in a perfectly tailored Savile Row suit. His hair was silver, his eyes the color of steel. He looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her simple dress and the small suitcase at her feet. He didn't hug her. He didn't say, "Welcome home." "So," he said, his voice as cold as the November air. "The real world was not to your liking, it seems." "Hello, Father," she said, lifting her chin. She would not be cowed, not anymore. The car ride to the family penthouse overlooking Central Park was silent and heavy with unspoken, "I told you so's." The penthouse was exactly as she remembered, cavernous, exquisitely decorated, and utterly devoid of warmth. "He left you," her father stated, not asked, as he poured himself a glass of scotch. "He betrayed me," she corrected, "and I left him. There is a difference, all the difference in the world," she said. "I'm pregnant." Alexander paused the glass halfway to his lips. He looked at her stomach, and for a fleeting instant, she saw a flicker of something other than disapproval in his eyes. It was gone as quickly as it appeared. "A complication," he said, turning away. "We will handle it. The Blythe lawyers are the best in the world. The child will be a Blythe. The father will have no rights, no contact, and no claim. He will sign whatever we put in front of him, or he will find himself unemployable in any city on any continent for the rest of his life." Ginevra nodded slowly. This was the power she had run from, and now it was the very weapon she needed. "That is exactly what I want." The next few months were a strange sort of purgatory. Ginevra was back in the gilded cage. She had access to unlimited funds, the best doctors, the finest clothes, but she was deeply, profoundly alone. Her father treated her with a detached sort of proprietary concern, the way one might treat a valuable asset that had been damaged and was now under repair. She poured all her energy into her pregnancy and her re-education. She spent her days in the Blythe Global Headquarters, a towering skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. She was no longer Jenna the librarian. She was Ginevra Blythe, the heiress apparent. She sat in on board meetings, devoured financial reports, and relearned the brutal, intricate language of corporate warfare. Whitaker was her shadow, her confidant, and her guide through this re-entry. 8 months after that terrible night in Seattle, she gave birth to a son. She named him Rowan. The moment she held him, a fierce, primal love, unlike anything she had ever known, flooded her entire being. He was not a complication. He was her reason. He was the future. Looking at his tiny, perfect face, she made a vow. She would build a world for him where no one could ever hurt him. A fortress of power and influence, so absolute that the name Ashford would be nothing more than a forgotten whisper. The 5 years that followed were a crucible. Ginevra didn't just learn the family business, she mastered it. She had her father's strategic mind, but tempered it with a modern technological savvy he lacked. She saw opportunities in emerging markets and green technology that the older board members dismissed. She was ruthless in negotiations, yet her employees were fiercely loyal as she treated them with a respect her father never had. When Alexander Blythe suffered a major stroke in her 4th year, back Ginevra seamlessly took the reins. There was no power vacuum, no hesitation. She was ready. While her father recovered, albeit in a diminished capacity, she transformed the company. Under her leadership, Blythe Global's profits surged. She was no longer the heiress in waiting. She was the queen on the throne. She made headlines in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, a brilliant and enigmatic new power player in the world of global finance. The quiet, gentle Jenna Smith was buried so deep, Ginevra herself could barely remember her. On Rowan's 5th birthday, a massive development opportunity arose, a project so ambitious it was dubbed the Olympus Project, a multi-billion-dollar plan to revitalize a huge swath of Seattle's waterfront. Several major firms were bidding for it. Whitaker brought the prospectus to her private office, a minimalist space with a floor-to-ceiling window offering a god's-eye view of Manhattan. "This is a massive undertaking," Whitaker noted, placing the file on her desk. "It's also in Seattle. Are you sure you want this?" Ginevra looked at the file, her expression unreadable. She flipped through the pages until she came to the list of architectural firms attached to the competing bids. And there it was. One of the lead firms for a rival bid, backed by a powerful local developer, was Davenport and Associates. The lead architect listed for their proposal was Lorcan Ashford, now a full partner. A slow, cold smile touched Ginevra's lips. It didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, yes," she said softly, her gaze fixed on her ex-husband's name. "I'm sure. Get the acquisition team ready, Whitaker, and book my jet. It's time I paid a visit to Seattle." Seattle had not changed, but Ginevra had. She arrived not as a runaway heiress seeking anonymity, but as a conqueror. Her arrival was an event. The Blythe Global Corporate Jet, a sleek black bird with a discreet golden bee on its tail, taxied to a private terminal where a fleet of black sedans waited. Ginevra deplaned a striking figure in a tailored charcoal grey power suit and stiletto heels that clicked with authority on the tarmac. Her dark hair was cut in a sharp, elegant bob. Sunglasses concealed her eyes, but not the aura of immense power that surrounded her. This was not Jenna Smith who would have worried about blending in. This was Ginevra Blythe, a woman who owned every room she entered. Blythe Global's bid for the Olympus project sent shockwaves through the city's business community. They were an East Coast behemoth, an apex predator, now circling a project the local players thought was theirs to fight over. An introductory meeting was called for all primary bidders with the city's planning commission. It was a formality, but a necessary one. Ginevra walked into the sterile modern boardroom, followed by her team of lawyers and analysts. She took her seat at the head of the massive table, a position that was offered to her out of deference to her company's sheer scale. Her eyes, now free of their sunglasses, scanned the room. She saw old Mr. Davenport, his face puffier and redder than she remembered. She saw his daughter Penelope looking polished and severe in a cream-colored suit, a large diamond on her left hand. And then she saw him. Lorcan Ashford stood by the window talking with a city official. He looked older. There were fine lines around his eyes, and his hair was artfully styled to hide a receding hairline. He wore an expensive suit with the casual confidence of a man who believed he had earned his place at this table. He had the Sky Spire to his name, a building that was now an iconic part of the city. Her building. When he turned, his eyes briefly met hers. There was a flicker of something curiosity, the way a man looks at an attractive and powerful woman. But there was no recognition. None at all. To him she was a stranger. A ghost with a familiar face he couldn't quite place. A small, cruel thrill went through her. This was better than she could have imagined. The meeting began. When it was Blythe Global's turn to introduce themselves, Ginevra stood up. Her voice was cool, crisp, and carried an authority that made everyone sit up a little straighter. "Good morning. I am Ginevra Blythe, CEO of Blythe Global," she said, her gaze sweeping the room before landing deliberately on Lorcan. "We don't believe in incremental change. Our vision for the Olympus project is not just to build structures, but to create a new heart for this city. We will be investing our own capital, and our proposal will be revolutionary." She watched Lorcan as she spoke. He was studying her intently, a slight frown on his face. She could see him trying to place her. Did they meet at a conference in Dubai, a fundraiser in New York? The idea that she could be the meek librarian from his past was so far outside the realm of his reality that his brain simply couldn't make the connection. Penelope, on the other hand, was watching her with open hostility. She saw not a business rival, but a threat on a more personal level. Ginevra was younger, her power was self-evident, and she had an unnerving focus that made Penelope's inherited status feel flimsy. After the meeting, as people mingled, Lorcan approached her. He had that same charming smile she had once fallen for, but now she could see the calculation behind it. "Ms. Blythe," he began, extending a hand. "Lorcan Ashford, partner at Davenport and Associates. That was an impressive introduction. You've certainly made your presence felt." Ginevra let her eyes drift to his outstretched hand for a fraction of a second, before meeting his gaze again, making no move to take it. "Mr. Ashford, your Sky Spire is quite the landmark. Such a unique design. It really put your firm on the map, I believe." His smile widened, filled with pride. "Thank you. It was a passion project, the kind of once-in-a-lifetime inspiration you hope for as an architect. Inspiration can come from the most unexpected places," she said, her voice smooth as silk. A tiny, almost imperceptible flicker of confusion crossed his face. The phrase was vaguely familiar, but he couldn't grasp why. Before he could respond, Penelope was at his side, slipping her arm through his. "Lorcan, darling, father is ready to leave." Her eyes were daggers as she looked at Ginevra. "Ms. Blythe, welcome to Seattle. We trust you won't find the competition here too provincial." "On the contrary, Mrs. Ashford," Ginevra replied, her eyes briefly flicking to the diamond ring. "I find it fascinating. It's always a pleasure to compete with legacy firms. They have so much history, and so much to lose." With a slight dismissive nod, Ginevra turned and walked away, leaving them standing there. "What was that about?" Penelope hissed at Lorcan. "The way she looked at you." "I don't know," Lorcan said, his eyes still following Ginevra's retreating form. "There's something about her. I feel like I know her from somewhere." "She's a corporate shark from New York, Lorcan. That's all you need to know," Penelope snapped. "Now stop staring and let's go. We have a lot of work to do if we're going to beat her." But Lorcan couldn't shake the feeling. Later that night, in the penthouse suite Ginevra had taken at the Four Seasons, she stood by the window looking out at the city skyline. The Sky Spire dominated the view, its unique tree-like exoskeleton lit up against the night sky. Her design. His monument. Whitaker entered the room. "The initial reconnaissance is complete," he said. "Davenport and Associates is financially over-leveraged. They need this project to stay solvent. They're desperate." "Good," Ginevra said, not turning from the window. "Desperate people make mistakes. And Lorcan Ashford, he doesn't recognize me," she said, a hint of wonder in her voice. He looked right at me and saw nothing. "Oh, Bozor." "You are not the woman he knew, Ginevra." "No." She agreed, turning to face him. The cold smile was back. "The woman he knew is dead. He killed her, and he's about to meet the woman who took her place." The game had begun. She wouldn't just outbid him. She would dismantle his entire world piece by piece until he was left with nothing but the truth of what he had done. Ginevra's strategy was a masterclass in psychological warfare. She didn't launch an immediate, overwhelming assault. Instead, she began with 1,000 subtle cuts. Her first move was to poach 2 of Davenport and Associates' most talented young structural engineers. The offers Blythe Global made were so astronomically high, so filled with perks and creative freedom, that Davenport couldn't possibly counter. It was a show of financial force that sent a ripple of fear through the local industry. More importantly, it weakened Lorcan's team from the inside. Next, she began appearing everywhere. She'd be at the same exclusive restaurant where Lorcan and Penelope were having a power dinner, seated at a better table, hosting a cadre of influential city council members. She joined the board of the Seattle Art Museum, the very site of her humiliation, and her first act was to announce a new wing dedicated to innovative architectural design, a move that put her at the center of the world Lorcan considered his own. She played on his memory, dropping verbal breadcrumbs that he couldn't quite follow. During a televised debate between the project bidders, she was asked about her design philosophy. "I believe the best ideas are often born from collaboration," she said, looking directly into the camera but speaking to him. A spark of intuition from one person can ignite a fire of genius in another. True visionaries acknowledge their sources of inspiration. Lorcan, watching from his office, felt a jolt. The phrasing was so similar to things Jenna used to say. He shook his head, annoyed. It was a coincidence, but the unease lingered. Penelope's jealousy, meanwhile, was curdling into outright paranoia. She saw the way Lorcan watched Ginevra Blythe. It wasn't just the focus of a competitor. It was something more obsessive. "You're fixated on her," Penelope accused him one night in their sterile, minimalist apartment that overlooked the water. "I'm fixated on beating her," Lorcan corrected, his eyes glued to a financial report on Blythe Global. "She's aggressive, unpredictable." "She's a woman and you're intrigued," Penelope spat. "Don't think I don't see it. The way you look at her. You looked at that librarian that way once." The mention of Jenna was a taboo subject. After their messy split, Lorcan had paid her a small sum to disappear, channeled through a lawyer. He'd never heard from her again, and assumed she'd gone back to whatever small town she came from, baby in tow. The memory was an inconvenient, embarrassing footnote in his success story. "This has nothing to do with Jenna," he snapped. "Don't be ridiculous." But Penelope's words had planted a seed. He started digging. There was no public information on Ginevra Blythe before 5 years ago. It was as if she had sprung into existence fully formed as a CEO. He hired a private investigator, a discreet man who had done work for Davenport's firm before. While Lorcan was chasing ghosts, Ginevra was laying her trap. She knew the Olympus project bidding process would culminate in a final public presentation to the City Commission and a host of investors. It was the perfect stage. Through her new hires and other less savory intelligence channels, she acquired a copy of Davenport and Associates' final proposal for the Olympus project. As she suspected, The centerpiece was a magnificent tower, a spiritual successor to the Sky Spire. It used the same fundamental design principles, the external organic framework, that she had sketched out on a napkin in a small house on Willow Creek Lane all those years ago. He had built his entire career on a single stolen idea, and now he was trying to do it again. "He's a one-trick pony," she murmured to Whittaker, looking over the stolen plans. "It was a very good trick," Whittaker noted dryly. "It was," she agreed. "And now it's time for the encore to be his downfall." She instructed her own architects to revise their proposal. Their original design was brilliant, but she had them create a secondary, even more audacious plan. It was wildly expensive, structurally complex, and would be a true marvel of modern engineering. A week before the final presentations, the private investigator came back to Lorcan with a thin file. "It's strange," the investigator said, sitting in Lorcan's office. "It's like she didn't exist before 2020. I found one thing, though. A ghost file in the King County record system almost completely expunged. A marriage license issued in 2019 to a Lorcan Ashford." Lorcan felt the blood drain from his face. "A marriage to me, that's impossible. Who was the bride?" The name on the file was corrupted, almost wiped clean. But a data recovery specialist pulled 2 fragments. The first name started with a J and ended with an A. The last name was Smith. Jenna Smith. Lorcan stared at the investigator, his mind refusing to connect the dots. Jenna was a simple, meek librarian. Ginevra Blythe was a titan of industry. It was impossible. It was insane. "There must be a mistake," Lorcan stammered. "There's more." The investigator continued, oblivious to Lorcan's inner turmoil. "I traced the source of the data wipe. It came from a highly encrypted server, but the digital signature belongs to one man, a Mr. Whittaker, head of private security for Blythe Global." The room began to spin. Jenna, Ginevra, the familiar way she spoke, the feeling he knew her. Inspiration can come from the most unexpected places. The Sky Spire. He raced home and tore through his old files boxes he hadn't opened in years. He finally found it, a small box of mementos from his life with Jenna. A dried flower from their first date. A photograph from the courthouse. He stared at the smiling woman in the simple white dress. Her hair was longer, she wore no makeup, and her eyes held a soft, trusting light he hadn't seen in years. But it was her. He held the photo next to a magazine cover featuring Ginevra Blythe. The bone structure was the same, the shape of the lips, the curve of her brow. The gentle librarian had been a disguise. The soft, loving woman was a phantom. His stepping stone was in fact the mountain. The scale of his miscalculation was so immense it made him physically ill. He had not just discarded a simple girl. He had betrayed the heiress to a multi-billion-dollar empire, and now she was back. Not for reconciliation. Not for revenge in any simple sense. She was back to strip him of everything he had built on her lie. And then a more terrifying thought hit him. The baby. Jenna had been pregnant, which meant Ginevra Blythe had a 5-year-old son. His son. He suddenly saw his path. It wasn't about the Olympus project anymore. A child. A son was leverage. A son was a connection, a way back in a way to survive. A cold, desperate hope filled him. He could still win this. The day of the final presentation was grey and overcast, the Seattle sky threatening a storm that matched the tempest brewing inside the City Hall auditorium. The room was packed with the city's most powerful figures, politicians, investors, journalists, and industry leaders. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. This was the final showdown for the soul of the city's future. Davenport and Associates presented first. Lorcan took the stage, his composure a carefully constructed mask. He was pale beneath his tan, but he projected an air of confident mastery. He spoke eloquently, his voice resonating through the auditorium as he unveiled their grand vision, culminating in a stunning 3D render of the new tower, a graceful spiraling structure that was undeniably beautiful. It was met with a wave of impressed applause. As he concluded, his eyes found Ginevra in the front row. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a secret acknowledgement. "I know." Then it was Ginevra's turn. She walked to the podium, not with a team of architects, but alone. She wore a striking crimson dress, a bold statement in the sea of corporate grey and navy. She looked directly at the commission, her gaze sweeping over the audience before finally landing on Lorcan. "Thank you," she began, her voice calm and clear. "The proposal put forth by Davenport and Associates is impressive. It's elegant, familiar, and for good reason." She clicked a button on her remote. The massive screen behind her, which had shown Lorcan's gleaming tower, now displayed a simple, hand-drawn sketch. It was a drawing on a coffee-stained napkin. "This is the genesis of the design philosophy you have just seen," Ginevra said, her voice dropping slightly, drawing the audience in. "An idea for an external branching framework, like a tree reaching for the sun. An idea I sketched out in a small house on Willow Creek Lane 6 years ago." A confused murmur rippled through the auditorium. Lorcan froze, his blood turning to ice. Penelope and her father stared, dumbfounded. "Many of you know me as Ginevra Blythe," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "But for a time, I lived here in Seattle under a different name. I was a woman who fell in love with an ambitious young architect, a woman who wanted nothing more than to support his dreams, a woman who gave him this idea freely and out of love." She clicked the remote again. The screen now showed the original blueprints for the Sky Spire, the ones she had taken from the house that night. Then next to them, she displayed the internal metadata from the digital design files, time-stamped, showing the core concept being implemented in a 48-hour frenzy, immediately following a series of text messages between her and Lorcan, where she had outlined the idea. The proof was digital, absolute, and irrefutable. "This idea," she said, her voice ringing with cold fury, "became the Sky Spire. It launched the career of Mr. Lorcan Ashford. It made him a partner. It made this city a landmark. But he didn't just take the idea, he took the credit. He erased the woman who gave it to him. He called her simple, a temporary inspiration, a stepping stone to be discarded." Gasps echoed through the room. Every eye was now on Lorcan, whose face was ashen. He looked like a man watching his own ghost. "The proposal you saw today from Davenport and Associates is not an evolution of a design," Ginevra declared, her voice reaching a crescendo. "It is the second theft from the same victim. And I am here today to tell you that the city of Seattle will not be built on a foundation of lies and stolen dreams." She paused, letting the weight of her revelation sink in. The silence was deafening. Mr. Davenport was staring at his son-in-law with utter horror. Penelope looked as if she had been slapped. "Blythe Global is therefore withdrawing our original bid," Ginevra announced. The room gasped again. "Because we can do better." She clicked the remote one last time. The screen exploded with a design so futuristic, so bold, it seemed to defy physics. A self-sustaining arcology with cascading green gardens, integrated public transport, and a central spire that drew power from atmospheric changes. It was breathtaking, a vision, not of 5 years from now, but 50. "This is our new proposal," she said. "Fully funded by Blythe Global. A gift to the city that taught me a very valuable lesson. We will build the future here. An honest future." She finished. The room was silent for a beat, And then it erupted. Not just applause, but a standing ovation. The commission was stunned, the investors were buzzing, and the journalists were scrambling. Lorcan Ashford was forgotten, a relic of a scandal that had just been born and died in the space of 10 minutes. His career was over. His reputation and that of the Davenport firm was in ashes. Later that evening, as Ginevra was preparing to leave her hotel penthouse, there was a frantic knock on the door. Whitaker opened it to reveal a dishevelled and desperate Lorcan. "I need to see her," he pleaded. Whitaker looked at Ginevra, who gave a single sharp nod. She met him in the living area. "What do you want, Lorcan?" she asked, her voice devoid of any emotion. Ginevra, I'm sorry," he stammered. "I was a fool. I was young and ambitious and stupid. I didn't know." "You knew exactly what you were doing," she said coldly. "You just didn't know who you were doing it to." "The boy," he said, his eyes wild with desperation. "Our son. He exists, doesn't he? I saw his picture in a magazine article about you. Rowan, he's my son. I have rights." This was the moment she had been waiting for, the final pathetic gambit. "Let me be very clear," she said, stepping closer, her voice a low and dangerous whisper. "You have no rights. When you abandoned your pregnant wife, you abandoned your child. The day after I left Seattle, a man came to you with a document and a check for $50,000. The document was a contract of full and final relinquishment of all parental rights to an unborn child in exchange for a clean break. You signed it without even reading it, so eager were you to be free of your inconvenience." She produced a copy of the document from a folder on the table. His signature was at the bottom, scrawled and arrogant. "Rowan is a Blythe," she said, her eyes like chips of ice. "He will never know your name. You are nothing to him. You are nothing to me. You tried to leverage our son. You tried to use the only pure thing that came from our time together as a bargaining chip to save yourself. There is no depth you will not sink to." He stared at the paper, then at her, his last hope crumbling into dust. He was utterly and completely beaten. "Now get out!" she commanded. "Get out of my hotel, get out of my city, and get out of my life. If I ever see or hear from you again, I will use the full weight of my resources to ensure that the word Ashford becomes synonymous with failure in every language on this planet." Lorcan stumbled backward, turned and fled. Ginevra watched him go, feeling not triumph, not joy, but a quiet, clean emptiness. The final ghost had been exorcised. The debt was paid. She looked out the window at the city lights at the sky spire that was her scar on the skyline. She placed a hand on her heart. She was not Jenna Smith, the victim. She was not even just Ginevra Blythe, the CEO. She was Rowan's mother, and her future, the one she would build for him, was just beginning. In the end, this wasn't just a story of revenge. It was a story of rebirth. Ginevra Blythe, once hidden away as the gentle Jenna Smith, didn't just reclaim her identity. She forged a new one in the fires of betrayal. She taught the world, and more importantly herself, that a person's worth is not determined by who they love, but by how they rise after that love is broken. She transformed her pain into power, her heartbreak into a global empire, all while raising a son who would know nothing but love and strength. Her journey is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals can sometimes lead to our greatest triumphs, and that the best victory is not in destroying an enemy, but in building a life so magnificent that they become completely irrelevant. What do you think she should do next? If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear about the power of resilience, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of overcoming the impossible. Your support helps us bring these incredible journeys to light.